Hi guys, welcome back aboard good old Athena. Today is the big day. Today we start our 2700 nautical mile passage across the Atlantic. As most of you know, this has been years and years in the making. I am excited, I'm nervous, I feel ready to go. Now I need to pay the marina and we need to get the boat all ship-shape before we head out, so we should be ready to leave in a couple of hours. My name is Mess, this is my wife Ava. I've spent the last 5 years on a somewhat extensive refit of our 1987 Warrior 38 named Athena. That was a DIY fun-packed adventure complete with a very extensive osmosis treatment, building a new rudder using vacuum infusion, rebuilding the entire deck, gutting and subsequently rebuilding most of the interior, painting the topsides, and a ton of other projects. The summer of 2021 we started cruising full time. Now we're finally ready to begin our adventure. Our passage should take about 3 weeks. We only really have a weather forecast for the first 8 or 9 days, but it's looking pretty good. We're up here by the Canary Islands. Down here we've got Cape Verde. We're gonna head towards Cape Verde and then turn east towards the Caribbean. For the first 2 days, we should have very light winds. We might even run into a little bit of a wind hole with no wind, but this could also turn out to be spinnaker weather, so that's very exciting. After those first 2 or 3 days, the wind should start filling in, and we should have a fairly nice sail down towards Cape Verde. That sounds perfect, or at least perfect in theory, because over the last 2 or 3 days, the weather forecast has changed dramatically. So yeah, we'll see what happens once we leave, but at least for now, the weather forecast looks really good. With the help of the ever-attentive crew, I reversed Athena out of our berth in Santa Cruz and motored out into the outer part of the harbor. Once in open water, we got the mainsail out and then promptly discovered that Captain Dum Dum had forgotten to rig the preventer. After having fixed that little whoopsie, we rigged the whisker pole for the headsail. It would of course have been easier to rig both the pole and the preventer in the massive outer harbor, but we got it done, and just like that, we were underway. I don't know if the camera will pick it up in the background, but we have officially left Tenerife behind us. We have the preventer on the boom and we have the headsail poled out. The whisker pole is a teeny bit on the short side, but it's okay. We can extend the pole one jump further, but for our first night out, I think it's better to err on the side of caution. You might just barely be able to pick up the little white dot there, and then there's a hole about 40 centimeters to the right of that. That should be enough to get the sail all the way out, but that doesn't leave a lot of overlap in the pole, and there's a lot of leverage there. So yeah, like I said, we'll err on the side of caution. It's a dream or a major milestone for many sailors to cross the Atlantic, and it feels almost unreal to finally be doing it after having spent 5 or 6 years refitting Athena. I am really sad that Ava can't be here, but this is the first of many crossings and she'll be there for the next one. It's about 3 days later. The first 2 or 3 days on a passage are always the worst. And we haven't had any seasickness on this passage, so that's really nice. But just settling back into the watch schedule can be very exhausting. I don't know why. Maybe it's a sleep deprivation thing or something like that, but even just doing like smaller tasks just seem exhausting. We've had to run the engine for about 26 hours over the last 3 days, but according to the latest weather forecast, we should now be good to sail the rest of the way to Mindelo. The Canary Islands are up here, Cape Verde, which is where Mindelo is, are down here. We still have another 468 nautical miles to go. There are a few good reasons for us to stop in Mindelo. For one, it'll allow all of us to get nice and rested before the second leg of the Atlantic crossing. Also, there's a bit of weather that we would like to have blow through before we push on. And we've also developed a small, very annoying leak that's setting off the bilge pump about once an hour. Mark has introduced or threatened to introduce some of the practices from his 29 years in the Navy, like for instance having the first watch polish all of the stainless, which sounds like a horrible job. But he's also introduced this little guy, our ship's log. In this little book we note our position and our course every hour and any other noteworthy events, like for instance here. Today is Captain Mad's birthday. His crew knew but forgot. Punishment will be swift and creative. All kidding aside, I think morale is pretty good here aboard the boat, and yeah, I think we're all excited to get to Mandelo in 4 days, but we still do have 4 days to get there. And this is where we had the first bit of rigging fail during the passage. Fortunately, we have plenty of spares aboard, and in this case it was just a shackle that had vibrated open. In the excitement of rigging the pole, we had not used ceasing wire on the shackle. Fortunately, this was an easy fix. Passage making can be hard work, not because there's a lot to do, especially not with a full crew, but more so because even simple tasks like doing the dishes require a fair bit of effort in bracing yourself. The same goes for something as simple as showering. This was the calmest day on our passage, and even on a day like that, a refreshing shower takes some effort, especially when you're standing on an ever so slightly slippery shower pan. At least the view out of the shower was a 10 out of 10. Now, even though it takes some effort, a refreshing shower is well worth it even on the more bumpy days. Just like when it's only Ava and me aboard the boat, most of the time during the passage was spent hanging out in the cockpit. However, this time around we tried our hand at a bit of bio-gambling, aka fishing, and probably caught a very nice mahi-mahi. Dinner that night was a feast. We're making great progress. I think we are on, maybe it's day 6, maybe it's day 7, nobody really knows. But we have about 120 miles to go to Mandelo, and we are screaming along. We've been going dead downwind for the last couple of days and about 20 knots of wind, and yeah, the boat seems perfectly happy. Originally, like I mentioned, we weren't really planning on stopping in Mandelo, but we're gonna stop there to check out that little leak we found, which we think now might be coming from the chain locker, so that'll be good to get that figured out. And also there's that little bit of weather we would like to have blow past us. And also, and this is a little bit more serious, there might potentially be an issue with the steering. On a quick little side note, here is the crew. There's Mark and Julian, one in t-shirt and shorts, and one in full Arctic gear. A couple of months ago, we went up on the Hard in Vigo in Spain to check out a weird sound from the rudder and also to fix some other smaller jobs. Now, I never found out what actually caused that sound from the rudder. Underneath this little cover here is our rudder stock. This is where the emergency tiller would attach to, and this is, well, directly built into the rudder. But when looking at this, when we're going down big waves, surfing down them, this doesn't go just round, it also goes from side to side. It's really hard to catch on camera, but in this little clip right here, you should be able to see it just move ever so slightly from side to side. Now, that could be worn bushings, but I did replace all of the bushings before we splashed Athena 2 years ago, and Delrin bushings like this, they shouldn't really wear out in 2 years, especially because we have only done 3,000 some odd miles. We still have steerage, so there's in no way an emergency here, but it is certainly something that would be nice to check out while we're in Mandelo before we set out on the second leg of the Atlantic crossing, which is something like 2,000 miles. This might sound a little bit odd, but for me, part of the allure of going long distance cruising is fixing stuff in remote places. I think Mandelo and this steering issue is going to be the first test of the theory of whether or not this is actually going to be fun. So yeah, fingers crossed we sort something out in Mandelo. One of the topics that come up from time to time when we're talking to other cruisers is the watch schedule, and Mark has introduced a new watch schedule here aboard Athena that I've never tried before. This is an example of that watch schedule. This is for the first 3 days, but this could be extended indefinitely. As you can see, we're 3 people aboard the boat, and we generally speaking have 4-hour watches, except for around dinner time where there are 2 2-hour watches. That means that no one person gets stuck with the same midnight to 4 watch every night. Because of the 2 dogs, as Mark calls them, around dinner time, there will always be a shifting motion in who has whatever time slot. So let's look at the example again. On day 1, you can see I've got the midnight to 4, then Mark has the 4 to 8, and Julian has the 8 to 12. But then if we go to day 2, because of the dogs down here, Mark has the midnight to 4, whereas Julian then has the 4 to 8, and I have the 8 to 12. On the passages that Ava and I have done up until now, we've had a little bit more of a loosey-goosey watch schedule system, where whichever person got tired the first in the evening would get down, take a nap, and then come up 3 or 4 hours later, and then we would swap like that. But yeah, with a watch schedule like this that's rotating, I don't know if it's just because of that or because we're one extra person aboard the boat, so we get a lot more sleep. But yeah, so far this newfangled one has worked out really well. One of the things I was curious about with this passage was to see how long it would take for me to get my sea legs. Some of you might remember that I've been seasick a couple of times in the past. Now, I personally never believed that that meant I couldn't go blue water sailing. Over the years here on YouTube, I've only ever gotten very few mean or negative comments, and there are only a few of those that have actually stuck with me. One of those I remember, or a group of those that I remember, is when I was rebuilding the deck, there were a few people saying, "Oh, you'll never finish the boat, it'll never sail again." Well, kind sir, I do beg to differ. Also, every time the subject of seasickness comes up, there seem to be a few people that are quick to comment something along the lines of, "Oh no, you get seasick so you can never go offshore sailing," or "Oh no, you wasted 5 years of your life doing the refit, now you can't use the boat for anything because you get seasick." And again here, I do beg to differ. After the first 3 or 4 days at sea, I don't really notice the motion of the boat that much, except for, of course, when moving around and you're bracing all the time, which does get a little bit annoying. But I think this is going to be true for 99.9% of people. Yeah, the first 3 or 4 days are gonna suck a little bit. You might feel a little bit tired, you might feel a little bit disoriented, nauseous and stuff like that. You may even go through the whole seasickness experience, complete with vomiting and everything. But after that, I think for most people, your body will adjust to the motion. The only bit of small print or downside here is that that 3 or 4 day period seems to reset every time you start a new passage. And that does suck a little bit because those first 3 or 4 days are no fun. But after that, you can actually settle in and start enjoying passage making, especially if you have a full crew like here where we all get plenty of sleep. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely love all of the kind, supportive, creative and funny comments I've gotten over the years. But there is a tiny bit of joy associated with proving the negative or mean comments wrong. I guess that's completely natural. But yeah, if you're suffering with seasickness and you still have a burning desire to go offshore sailing, I would say still give it a go. After those 3 or 4 days, you might be perfectly fine. And if you have a giant boat project like a big deck rebuild on a Warrior 38 and somebody's telling you you can't do it, if you know that you can do it, well then you can probably do it. Good morning guys, it is 167 hours since we left Tenerife and we have land. Oh, it's a little bit hazy in there, so you won't be able to see it on camera, but to the naked eye, there's definitely an island in there. That's the island over here. So now all we have to do is make our way to Mindelo, to the marina here. That is still about 16 nautical miles away. If it wasn't for the whole steering issue situation, I think we would just go to anchor. But because of that, we're gonna see if we can get a spot in the marina. The only downside is that marina is med style, so in that one I think there is what's called a slime line and you go stern to, and Athena does not back up very well, so yeah, this is gonna be terrifying. The wind picked up to around 30 knots and the waves started to build as we approached Mindelo. The sea state luckily subsided as soon as we entered the harbor, but the wind was still howling. Now the marina guy had told us over the radio that we could come alongside the fuel jetty. I was hoping that meant we could get away with not doing med-style mooring, but I was sadly mistaken. After some somewhat tense reversing in high winds, Athena was securely tied up. And just like that, that is the first 800 miles of our 2,700 mile Atlantic crossing done. Now before we can leave Mindelo, I desperately want to take a deep dive into that rudder or steering issue, and I also want to fix that little leak from the anchor locker. You may have noticed that it is pretty windy and bumpy here in Mindelo right now, but yeah, I'm, to put a positive spin on it, very interested to see how easy it's going to be to get something like a steering issue fixed here, because It's kind of a remote place. I don't know what the availability is of parts here and what facilities they have for machining stuff, even if it's something easy like Delron. But yep, I guess we'll find out, and I'm really crossing my fingers that it is just a bushing that's somehow gotten destroyed, even though they're just 2 years old. So yeah, fingers crossed. On a quick little side note, Mr. Dishy, our Starlink connection, worked perfect, flawlessly, all the way from the Canary Islands up until about 10 or 15 miles from the Cape Verde Islands. Then it cut out, and I think that's because the Cape Verde Islands are not officially supported yet. So even though there is coverage in the area, Starlink won't allow us to connect. That sucks a little bit, because that means I'm gonna have to go out and hunt for a data SIM card and all of that nonsense, but I hope I'll find one later today. Now, I fully expect Starlink to start working again as soon as we leave the islands, or also fingers crossed for that. I'll end the video here, and then I'll head out and start hunting for one of those SIM cards. And then I hope to see all you guys back here aboard Athena next week for hopefully some progress on the steering situation. But yeah, as always, feel free to leave a comment down below, and don't forget, if you've enjoyed this video, please remember to leave a like. See you!